As he walked past the gardener, the millionaire saw her pendant and froze. The same pendant his beloved used to wear before she died 20 years ago. The California sun beat down on Richard Cole's sprawling Santa Barbara estate, casting long shadows across the manicured lawn. At 51, Richard had everything money could buy: a real estate empire, a mansion overlooking the Pacific, and a life most would envy. Yet as he wandered through his garden that spring morning, a familiar emptiness gnawed at him. 24 years had passed since the accident, and still, some days the pain felt as fresh as yesterday. He paused by the rose garden, watching the young gardener tend to the white blooms. Emily Carter had been working for him for almost 6 months now, her nimble fingers coaxing life from the soil with a natural talent that had impressed his landscaper enough to hire her. Despite her limited experience, there was something about her, perhaps the intense focus in her green eyes, or the quiet way she hummed to herself, that had always struck him as vaguely familiar. "Those are coming along beautifully," Richard said, approaching the flower bed. Emily looked up, brushing a strand of chestnut hair from her face. "Thank you, Mr. Cole. The soil pH is finally balanced just right. Roses can be so temperamental." She stood, and as she did, something caught the sunlight around her neck. Richard's world narrowed to a single point of emerald green nestled in a lotus-shaped setting of white gold. His breath caught in his throat. The pendant, identical to the one he'd given Victoria Monroe 24 years ago, a custom piece he'd had designed for their first anniversary. "That pendant," Richard heard himself say, his voice sounding distant to his own ears. "Where did you get it?" Emily's hand instinctively rose to touch the jewelry. "This, my grandmother gave it to me on my 15th birthday. It was my mother's. She left it for me before she disappeared." Richard felt the ground shift beneath his feet. "Your mother's name," he managed. "Was it Victoria? Victoria Monroe?" The color drained from Emily's face. "How did you know that?" Memories rushed through Richard's mind. Victoria's smile, her laugh, the last kiss they shared before she drove off along the coastal highway that stormy October night, 6 months pregnant with their child, a child who would now be exactly Emily's age. "That pendant was a custom piece," Richard said, his voice trembling. "I gave it to Victoria Monroe 24 years ago. She was wearing it the night of the accident." He swallowed hard. "The night she died." Emily staggered back, her hand clutching the workbench for support. "Mr. Cole, what are you saying?" "Victoria was pregnant when she died. With my child," the words hung in the air between them. "A child who would be 23 now. Exactly your age. You think..." Emily's voice was barely audible. "You think I'm your daughter." Inside the mansion, Linda Prescott Cole stood at the second-floor window, watching the scene unfold in the garden below. 23 years of marriage to Richard hadn't dulled her observational skills. She recognized the moment her world began to crumble, saw it in the way Richard's body tensed, the way he reached toward Emily's necklace. Linda's hands trembled as she stepped away from the window, her mind racing. That damned pendant. She'd thought it lost forever, sunk to the bottom of the Pacific along with Victoria Monroe and her unborn child. For 23 years, she'd built her life on that certainty. She reached for her phone, scrolling to a number she hadn't called in years. When the gruff voice answered, she spoke without preamble. "Gary, it's me. We have a problem." 3 days later, Richard paced the floor of his private study, waiting for Ethan Ross to arrive. Outside his door, he could hear the quiet efficiency of the household staff, the occasional murmur of Linda's voice directing someone. He'd told her nothing about his suspicions, about the DNA test he'd arranged, about the private investigator he'd hired. Years of business negotiations had taught him the value of keeping his cards close. The discreet knock at the side entrance to his study signaled Ethan's arrival. Richard unlocked the door himself, ushering in the tall, lean man with salt and pepper hair who'd come highly recommended by his attorney. "Mr. Cole," Ethan said, shaking his hand firmly. "I understand you need absolute discretion." Richard nodded, gesturing toward a chair. "What I'm about to tell you doesn't leave this room." Over the next half hour, Richard recounted the story. His whirlwind romance with Victoria 24 years ago. The pregnancy, the fatal accident on a stormy night when her car plunged off the coastal highway into the churning Pacific. How her body was never recovered. his marriage to Linda, his former assistant, just a year later, and now, the shocking discovery of Emily Carter and her pendant. "I've arranged for a DNA test," Richard said. "The results should be back in a few days, but I need more than that. If Emily is my daughter, then what really happened that night? The accident report cited brake failure, but Victoria called me that day." He paused. Remembering, she sounded frightened, said she needed to talk to me about someone close to me, someone she didn't trust. The call dropped, and I never... His voice broke. 24 years of guilt washed over him. Guilt for not insisting she tell him right then, for letting her drive alone that night, for moving on so quickly with Linda, while Victoria and possibly his child lay in a watery grave, or so he'd thought. Ethan nodded, making notes in a small black book. "I'll need access to the original accident reports. Any information about Victoria's background, family, and this Emily Carter. Everything you have on her." "Of course." Richard handed him a folder. "This is everything I could gather quickly without raising suspicion. There's something else." He hesitated. "My wife, Linda. She and Victoria knew each other. Linda was my assistant back then. If Emily is my daughter, if Victoria somehow survived, you're wondering if your wife might know more than she's let on." Ethan finished for him. Richard didn't answer directly. "Just be thorough, Mr. Ross, and careful, very careful." As Ethan left through the side entrance, Richard turned to the window, looking out at the rose garden where Emily had been working earlier. She'd called in sick today, understandably shaken by their encounter. Richard couldn't stop seeing her face in his mind, couldn't stop the hope rising in his chest. For 24 years, he'd believed his child died before taking a single breath. Now, he dared to hope that part of Victoria had survived after all. The emerald lotus pendant had brought his past rushing back, and Richard Cole wouldn't rest until he uncovered the truth, no matter what it might cost him. Linda Prescott Cole's hands trembled as she sat in her Mercedes, parked outside a rundown bar on the outskirts of Ventura. The place looked even more decrepit than it had 24 years ago. Peeling paint, neon signs with missing letters, and a clientele that remained carefully anonymous. She checked her appearance in the rearview mirror, tucking a strand of perfectly highlighted blonde hair behind her ear. At 49, she still turned heads, maintained a perfect figure, and hosted the most enviable charity galas in Santa Barbara. All of it could crumble in an instant. The passenger door opened, and Gary Nolan slid in beside her. Time hadn't been kind to him. His once athletic frame had softened. Deep lines bracketed his mouth, and his eyes carried the wary look of a man who'd spent decades looking over his shoulder. "You shouldn't have called me," he said without preamble. "We agreed. No contact unless it was an emergency." "This is an emergency," Linda hissed. "She's alive, Gary. Or at least her daughter is." Gary's face went slack. "That's impossible. We watched the car go over. No one could have." "The girl has the pendant, Victoria's daughter. She's working as a gardener at our estate, and Richard has seen it." Linda's carefully manicured nails dug into the leather steering wheel. "He's already suspicious. I saw them talking in the garden." "Jesus Christ." Gary dragged a hand down his face. "After all these years," he turned to her suddenly. "How do you know it's her daughter? Could be a coincidence." Linda gave him a withering look. "A 23-year-old girl with Victoria's pendant and Victoria's eyes, working in my garden, that's one hell of a coincidence, Gary." Silence settled between them, heavy with the weight of their shared past. "What did we miss?" Gary finally asked. That night, Linda's mind traveled back to 24 years ago, to the rain lashing against the windshield as they followed Victoria's car along the coastal highway. She'd been Richard's assistant then, hopelessly in love with her boss, watching him fall deeper under Victoria's spell each day. When Victoria announced her pregnancy, something inside Linda had snapped. "It doesn't matter what we missed," Linda said sharply. "What matters is fixing it now. We need to find Victoria before Richard does." Gary shifted uncomfortably. "And do what?" "Exactly." Linda's eyes, cold as the Pacific in winter, met his. "Finish what we started." Emily Carter sat on the edge of her grandmother's bed, watching the older woman sleep. Margaret Carter's once robust frame looked frail against the white hospital sheets, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped softly in the dimly lit room. Cancer, stage 4. The doctors had given her weeks, maybe days. Emily fought back tears. After everything that had happened with Richard Cole, she couldn't bear the thought of losing her grandmother too, the only family she'd ever known. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, finding Emily in the dim light. "You're here," she whispered. "Of course I am." Emily took her grandmother's thin hand. "How are you feeling?" "Like I'm dying," Margaret said with surprising clarity. Her gaze sharpened. "Something's happened. I can see it in your face." Emily hesitated. Her grandmother was too weak for this conversation, but time was running out. She reached into her pocket and pulled out the lotus pendant. "Grandma, I need to know the truth about my mother." "About this?" Margaret's eyes filled with tears as they fixed on the pendant. "Where did you wear it?" "To work, my boss, Mr. Cole. He recognized it." Emily leaned closer. "He said he gave it to my mother, that she was pregnant when she died, with his child." A single tear slid down Margaret's weathered cheek. "I always feared this day would come. So it's true. Richard Cole is my father." Margaret closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering strength. "Your mother came to me one night, soaked to the bone, bleeding, 6 months pregnant and terrified for her life. Said someone had tried to kill her, pushed her car off the road. She managed to get out just before it went over the cliff." Emily's heart pounded. "But why didn't she go to the police? To Richard?" "She overheard them, baby. The woman and a man, talking by the roadside after the crash. The woman said, 'Now he'll be mine.' Victoria was certain it was someone close to Richard, someone who wanted her out of the way." Margaret's breath came in short gasps. She was afraid they'd try again if they knew she'd survived. Afraid they'd hurt the baby. You. So she just disappeared. Left Richard thinking she was dead. The betrayal Emily felt on behalf of a man she barely knew surprised her. "She planned to contact him when it was safe," Margaret said. "But then she saw the announcement of his engagement in the paper, barely a year after her death, to his former assistant." A chill ran through Emily. "Linda Cole," Margaret nodded weakly. "After that, Victoria was convinced Linda was behind the accident. But she had no proof, and you were just a baby. She left you with me. Said she'd return when she could prove what happened, when she could keep you safe. But she never came back," Emily said bitterly. "She did, baby, every year on your birthday, watching from a distance." Margaret's eyes drifted to a drawer in the bedside table. "There's a key in there, to a storage unit. Everything she sent over the years. Letters, photos, explanations. I kept it all for when you were ready." "Ready for what?" "The truth," Margaret whispered, "and the danger that comes with it." Ethan Ross sat in his modest office, surrounded by stacks of files. The accident report on Victoria Monroe's death lay open before him. 24 years old, but the details were clear. Single vehicle accident, brake failure, car over cliff, body never recovered, case closed, too clean, too neat. He'd spent the afternoon making calls to old contacts, retired highway patrol officers, the mechanic who'd examined the recovered vehicle parts, the Coast Guard officer who'd coordinated the search. Each conversation added another layer of unease. The brakes had indeed failed, but the investigator noted the brake line appeared to have been tampered with. The timing matched Linda's story about being with Richard that evening, providing him an alibi of sorts, though no one had seriously considered him a suspect. Ethan pulled up the file on Emily Carter, 23 years old, raised by her grandmother, Margaret Carter. No father listed on the birth certificate. Mother's name, Victoria Carter, not Monroe. A detail that would have made connection difficult. Current address, a small apartment in Goleta, employment history, landscaping companies, garden centers, now the Cole estate. His phone buzzed with a text from his contact at the lab. DNA results expedited, ready tomorrow. Ethan leaned back in his chair, staring at the ceiling. If Emily was Richard's daughter, it would confirm Victoria had been pregnant when she disappeared, but it wouldn't explain how Emily came to be born, raised by her grandmother, with no mention of Richard Cole, unless Victoria had survived. His gaze fell on a photo of Linda Cole from a recent charity gala. Beautiful, composed, the perfect society wife. What would such a woman do if the past she'd buried suddenly threatened to rise from the grave? Ethan had a sinking feeling they were about to find out. Richard sat alone in his study, a glass of scotch untouched before him. From a locked drawer, he'd retrieved a small wooden box containing the few mementos he had of Victoria: photos, ticket stubs, and a single envelope containing the last birthday card she'd given him before the accident. He opened it now, reading her flowing handwriting. "To many more birthdays together. I love you more than words can say. Forever yours, Victoria." Forever. The word mocked him from the cream-colored paper. Outside, the phone in Linda's purse chimed with a text message. She glanced at it, her face betraying nothing as she excused herself to make a call. Richard watched her go, wondering if he'd ever really known his wife at all. Richard stared at the email on his phone, reading the words over and over as if they might somehow change. DNA paternity test results. 99th and 98% probability of paternity, despite having suspected it from the moment he saw the pendant. Seeing the confirmation in clinical, scientific terms made the reality crash over him like a wave. Emily Carter was his daughter. His child with Victoria hadn't died that night in the stormy waters of the Pacific. She had lived, grown up, and by some twist of fate, walked back into his life 23 years later. His finger hovered over Emily's contact information. She'd given him her number reluctantly after their encounter in the garden. Though she hadn't returned to work since, what could he possibly say? "Hello, I'm officially your father," seemed woefully inadequate. A knock at his study door interrupted his thoughts. Ethan Ross entered, his expression grave. "You've seen the results," Ethan said. "Not a question." Richard nodded. "She's my daughter. There's more." Ethan placed a file on the desk. "I spoke with Emily's neighbors. Her grandmother was admitted to Pacific Memorial Hospice 3 days ago. Terminal pancreatic cancer." "My God," Richard murmured. "Emily's been at her side constantly," Ethan continued. "According to the nurse I spoke with, they've been having some intense conversations. The grandmother seems to be sharing information Emily didn't know before." Richard's pulse quickened. "About Victoria?" "Possibly. I'm working on that." Ethan hesitated. "There's something else you should know. I've been reviewing the original accident investigation. The brake line on Victoria's car was deliberately cut." The words hit Richard like a physical blow. "You're saying it wasn't an accident?" "No." "Mr. Cole, someone tried to kill Victoria Monroe." Emily sat in the storage unit, surrounded by cardboard boxes. Each contained years of her mother's life. Clothes, books, journals, pieces of a woman Emily had never really known. The key her grandmother had given her had opened more than just this metal door. It had unlocked a past Emily wasn't sure she was ready to face. She pulled another box toward her, this one marked, "For Emily, 18th birthday." Inside was a letter in an envelope with her name written in elegant script. "My darling daughter, if you're reading this, it means your grandmother has decided you're ready for the truth. I hope you can forgive me for not being there to tell you myself. I never wanted to leave you. Every day apart has been its own kind of death, but staying would have put you in danger, and I couldn't risk losing you forever. By now, you may have learned who your father is. Richard Cole is a good man who didn't deserve what happened to us. I loved him deeply, and he would have loved you just as much had he known of your existence. The woman he married after my death, Linda Prescott, was once his assistant. She was obsessed with him, though he never saw it. The night of the accident, after my car went over the cliff, I heard her voice on the road above. She wasn't alone. There was a man with her. I didn't see their faces, but I heard enough to know they had intended for me to die that night. Without proof, going to Richard or the police would have only put us both in greater danger. So I made the hardest choice a mother can make. I disappeared to keep you safe. I've watched you from afar all these years, at your 5th birthday party in the park, your first day of school, your high school graduation, always at a distance, always aching to hold you. If you found your way to your father, be careful. Linda has killed once to have Richard. She won't hesitate to eliminate any threat to her marriage. I love you more than life itself. That has never changed and never will. Your mother, Victoria." Emily's hands trembled as she set down the letter. Tears streamed down her face, for the mother she'd never known, for the years they'd lost, for the terrible choice Victoria had been forced to make. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Richard Cole. "We need to talk. I have the test results." Linda sat in her charity foundation office, the picture of composure as she interviewed potential candidates for the Cole family scholarship. Inside, She was screaming. "So, Emily," she said, smiling warmly at the young woman sitting across from her. "Your work at our estate has been exemplary. Richard speaks very highly of your landscaping talents." Emily shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Thank you, Mrs. Cole. Please call me Linda." She slid a folder across the desk. "I've reviewed your application, and I'm pleased to tell you that you've been selected for our International Scholarship Program. A full year studying landscape architecture at the Royal Botanical Gardens in London, including housing and a stipend." Emily's eyes widened. "That's incredibly generous, but my grandmother is very ill, and I couldn't possibly—" "Of course, family comes first," Linda interrupted smoothly. "The scholarship can be deferred, naturally, but I wanted you to know the opportunity is there when you're ready. When you're far away from Richard," she thought. Emily hesitated, then asked, "May I ask why me?" "I'm sure there are more qualified applicants." Linda's smile never wavered. "Richard and I believe in nurturing talent wherever we find it. And you, my dear, have impressed us both." The lie slid easily from her lips, as so many had before. Richard waited in a quiet corner of a small cafe in downtown Santa Barbara. He'd chosen a public place for this meeting, hoping it might ease some of the tension. When Emily walked in, his breath caught. Seeing her now, knowing who she was, the resemblance to Victoria was unmistakable. The same graceful movement, the same intelligent eyes. She spotted him and walked over. Her expression guarded as she slid into the seat across from him. "I got your message about the test," she said without preamble. Richard nodded. "So you know that you're my biological father, yes?" Her voice was steady, but he could see the storm of emotions behind her eyes. "What I don't know is where we go from here." "That's entirely up to you," Richard said gently. "I won't pressure you into anything you're not comfortable with." Emily's eyes flashed. Comfortable. None of this is comfortable. Finding out that my entire life has been built on lies, that my mother abandoned me, that my father never knew I existed. Her voice broke slightly. And now my grandmother is dying, the only person who's ever been constant in my life. "I'm so sorry about your grandmother," Richard said. "If there's anything I can do, can you tell me why?" Emily interrupted, leaning forward. "Why did my mother never contact you? Why did she let you believe she was dead all these years?" Richard hesitated. "I'm still trying to figure that out myself. My investigator has reason to believe Victoria's accident wasn't an accident at all." Emily's hand went to the pendant at her throat. "She was afraid," she whispered. "She told my grandmother someone tried to kill her that night. Someone close to you." The implication hung in the air between them. "Your wife," Emily said finally. "My grandmother told me Victoria believed it was Linda." Richard felt ice spread through his veins. The pieces were falling into place. Victoria's frightened phone call about someone close to him. Linda's convenient appearance in his life after Victoria's death. The way she'd always steered him away from discussing Victoria over the years. "Did your mother ever contact you directly?" he asked. Emily shook her head. "No, but she left letters, photos. I found them yesterday." She reached into her bag and withdrew an envelope. "Including this." Richard opened it with trembling hands. Inside was a photograph of Victoria, older but unmistakable, standing at a distance behind a teenage Emily at what appeared to be a high school graduation. The date stamp showed it was just 5 years ago. "She's alive," Richard whispered. "All this time, she believed she was protecting me," Emily said, her voice a mixture of anger and grief. "But now I need to find her. I need answers." "We both do," Richard agreed. "But we need to be careful. If what Victoria believed is true, and Linda was involved." He couldn't finish the thought. Emily's eyes met his, determination replacing uncertainty. "I never had a father, and I only had a mother in letters and distant photographs. I don't know if I can forgive either of you for that, but I do know I want the truth." Richard nodded, feeling a surge of pride at her strength. "Then we'll find it together." Neither noticed Linda's assistant seated 2 tables away, phone in hand, recording every word. The small rental car idled at the curb of a modest bungalow in northeast Portland. Ethan Ross drummed his fingers on the steering wheel, eyes fixed on the house. According to his research, Ellen Foster had lived there for the past 15 years. Middle school English teacher, respected in the community, lived alone, kept to herself, no social media presence, minimal digital footprint. The kind of careful existence someone might maintain if they didn't want to be found. A woman emerged from the front door, locking it behind her. Even from this distance, the resemblance was unmistakable. Her hair was shorter now, streaked with gray, and she moved with the slight caution of someone who'd experienced physical trauma. But there was no doubt in Ethan's mind. Victoria Monroe was alive. She got into a blue Subaru and pulled away from the curb. Ethan waited a moment before following at a discreet distance. His instructions from Richard had been clear. Find her, but don't make contact. Not yet. He tailed her to a local middle school, watched as she entered the building with a stack of books. A bell rang, and soon teenagers streamed in through the doors. Just an ordinary teacher on an ordinary day, except she wasn't ordinary at all. She was a ghost, a woman who had walked away from her old life, leaving behind a grieving lover and, unknown to him, an unborn child. Ethan took out his phone and snapped several photos from a distance as she emerged hours later. He had what he needed. Victoria Monroe, now Ellen Foster, had been found. The hospice room was quiet, except for the steady beeping of monitors and Margaret Carter's labored breathing. Emily sat beside her grandmother's bed, holding her frail hand, a book open in her lap, though she hadn't turned a page in over an hour. Her mind was too full of the revelations of the past few days. You should go home and rest, the night nurse said gently, checking Margaret's vitals. She's stable for now. I'll call if anything changes. Emily shook her head. I want to be here. After the nurse left, Emily leaned closer to her grandmother. I met with him today, with Richard Cole. The DNA test confirmed he's my father. Margaret's eyes fluttered open. You've told him everything. About Mom. Yes. Emily squeezed her hand. Grandma, I need to find her. I found the storage unit. The letters. I know she's out there somewhere, watching from a distance. How do I reach her? Margaret's breathing grew more labored. There's a way, but it's dangerous. Linda Cole has eyes everywhere. I'm not afraid of Linda. You should be. Margaret's voice strengthened with urgency. Victoria wasn't the only one watching over you. Every few years, a woman would come asking questions about you, about Victoria, elegant, expensive clothes, always with a different excuse. Emily felt a chill. Linda, never herself, always someone who worked for her. The Cole Family Foundation. Margaret coughed weakly. In the bottom drawer of my dresser at home. Blue address book. Under F for Foster. Foster. Ellen Foster. Your mother's new name. Margaret's eyes drifted closed. She'll run if she thinks there's danger. You have to make her understand. Understand what? But Margaret had slipped back into an exhausted sleep, the conversation draining what little energy she had left. Emily sat back, her mind racing. Ellen Foster, after 23 years of wondering. She finally had a name, possibly an address, a way to find her mother. Linda's private cell phone buzzed as she was preparing for bed. She glanced at the screen, recognizing the number of the private investigator she kept on retainer, separate from Gary. Someone who didn't know about the past but was very good at gathering information in the present. She stepped into her dressing room, closing the door before answering. What do you have? They met at Café Lux this afternoon, the smooth voice reported. I have audio. Cole told the girl about the DNA test. It's confirmed. She's his daughter. Linda's fingers tightened around the phone. Anything else? The girl mentioned letters from her mother and a photograph. Recent. A pause. Mrs. Cole. It appears Victoria Monroe may be alive. The room seemed to tilt around Linda. That's impossible. The recording is unclear on details, but both Cole and the girl seem convinced. Cole has hired Ethan Ross to investigate. My sources tell me Ross left for Portland this morning. Portland. The city seemed to echo in Linda's mind, triggering a memory. Years ago, she'd hired someone to track down Margaret Carter's phone records. There had been monthly calls to a Portland number, but when Linda had that number investigated, it led to a dead end. A prepaid phone. Impossible to trace. I want everything on Ethan Ross's investigation. Whatever he finds, I want to know first. Linda ended the call and stood motionless in her dressing room, surrounded by designer clothes and jewelry worth more than most people made in a lifetime. all of it meaningless if Victoria returned to reclaim what Linda had stolen. She'd worked too hard, sacrificed too much to build this life. Richard had been hers for 23 years. She'd given him a social standing Victoria never could have, turned Cole Properties into a philanthropic powerhouse, made them respected throughout California. She would not lose it all now. Linda reached for her second phone, the one Richard didn't know about, and called Gary. "Meet me tomorrow. Our usual place. It's worse than we thought." Emily entered her grandmother's small house, the silence pressing in around her. She went directly to the bedroom, finding the blue address book exactly where Margaret had said it would be. Under F, a single entry, Ellen Foster, followed by an address in Portland and a phone number. Her mother, after 23 years, just a phone call away. Emily's hand trembled as she reached for her phone, but stopped halfway. Linda Cole had been watching her for years, according to her grandmother. What if her phone was being monitored somehow? What if making this call put her mother in danger again? She needed to be smarter than that. Instead, she texted Richard, "Need to talk. Not on the phone. Can you meet me at the hospice tomorrow morning?" His response came seconds later. "I'll be there. 9 a.m. Emily tucked the address book into her pocket. Whatever happened next, she wouldn't face it alone. Ethan Ross sat in his Portland hotel room, uploading the photographs he'd taken of Ellen Foster to his secure server. He'd followed her throughout the day, from school to a local grocery store, to a small bistro where she ate dinner alone. Reading a book, an ordinary life, meticulously constructed. His phone rang. Richard Cole. "Did you find her?" Richard asked without preamble. "Yes, she's living as Ellen Foster, middle school English teacher. Been here at least 15 years according to property records." Richard was silent for a moment. "What's she like?" Ethan hesitated, hearing the pain in his client's voice. "She seems quiet, respected by colleagues, lives simply, keeps to herself. No husband, family, none that I could detect. She wears no rings, lives alone in a small house." Another silence. "Has she seen you?" "No, I've been careful." Ethan frowned at his laptop screen as a notification appeared. Someone was attempting to access his server. "Mr. Cole, I need to go. There's a security issue with my files." He hung up and quickly traced the intrusion attempt. Professional, sophisticated, and originating from a familiar IP address registered to the Cole Family Foundation, Linda Cole was trying to access his files, which meant she knew about Victoria. Ethan immediately began copying his evidence to a separate secure location. As he worked, he didn't notice the dark sedan that had parked across from his hotel, or the man watching his window with patient, predatory eyes. Gary Nolan had found his target. The morning flight from Santa Barbara to Portland was mercifully short. Richard sat in first class, staring out the window as the landscape below transitioned from coastal mountains to the lush greenery of the Pacific Northwest. His mind, however, was 24 years in the past, the last time he'd seen Victoria alive, kissing him goodbye before heading out into the storm. "We'll talk when I get back," she'd said, a worried look in her eyes. "There's something I need to tell you." He never discovered what that something was, until now, after meeting Emily at the hospice that morning and learning about Ellen Foster's address in Portland. Richard had made an immediate decision. He had to see Victoria, not through photographs or secondhand accounts, but face to face. Emily had wanted to come, but her grandmother's condition had worsened overnight. Some reunions, Richard had told her gently, needed to happen one at a time. As the plane began its descent, his phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Security breach last night. Someone attempted to access my files on Ellen Foster. I've traced to Cole Foundation." Linda knows. Richard felt a cold knot form in his stomach. The pieces were falling into place with terrifying clarity. If Linda had been behind the attempt on Victoria's life all those years ago, what would she do now that her secret was threatened? "Where are you now?" Richard texted back, outside Foster's house. "She left for work 20 minutes ago. Something else. I was followed from my hotel this morning. Male, 50s, driving a dark sedan. The plane touched down with a jolt that matched Richard's racing pulse. Stay with Victoria. I'm heading straight to her school." Ellen Foster loved the quiet moments before class began. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of her classroom, dust motes dancing in the golden beams. She moved between the desks, straightening already. Neat rose, her mind elsewhere. Last night, she dreamed of Emily again. In the dream, her daughter had been wearing the lotus pendant, standing in a garden of white roses, looking directly at her as if she could finally see her mother after all these years of watching from the shadows. Ellen, Victoria, had woken with tears on her cheeks and an inexplicable sense of foreboding. 23 years of hiding, 23 years of looking over her shoulder, 23 years of loving her daughter from an impossible distance. The classroom door opened. Interrupting her thoughts, she turned, expecting an early student. Instead, she found herself staring into the face of a ghost. Richard Cole stood in the doorway, older but unmistakable. The same strong features, the same intense gaze, now lined with years she hadn't witnessed. For a moment, neither of them moved or spoke. The air between them seemed charged with the electricity of 2 decades of unspoken words. "Victoria," he finally said, her real name both familiar and strange on his lips. Her legs gave way, and she sank into the chair behind her desk. "How did you find me?" Richard stepped into the classroom, closing the door behind him. "Our daughter led me to you." Our daughter. 2 simple words that shattered the careful wall she'd built around her heart. "Emily," she whispered. "Is she? She's beautiful. Strong. Stubborn." A smile briefly touched his lips. "She has your eyes." Victoria felt tears welling up. "I never wanted to leave her." "You have to believe that." "Then why?" The question contained 24 years of grief and confusion. "Why did you let me think you were dead? Why did you never come back?" Victoria's hands trembled as she gripped the edge of her desk. "Because I knew who tried to kill me that night. And if I had come back, they would have finished the job. And maybe hurt Emily too." Richard moved closer, his expression darkening. "Linda," Victoria nodded. "And a man, her accomplice. I never saw his face, but I heard them talking after my car went over the cliff. I managed to get out just before it hit the water. Dragged myself up to the roadside. I was hiding in the bushes when they came to check if I was dead." Linda said. "Now he'll be mine?" the man asked. What they should do about the body, she told him the ocean would take care of it. Victoria's voice broke. "I was 6 months pregnant, Richard. Terrified. Injured. I knew if I went to you or the police, she would find a way to finish what she started." Richard's face had gone pale. "So you disappeared." "I went to my mother. She helped me through the pregnancy, kept Emily when I had to leave." Victoria wiped away tears. "I tried to build evidence against Linda over the years, but she was too careful. The man she worked with disappeared. The only thing I could do was stay away, keep watch from a distance, make sure Emily was safe. And then you saw our engagement announcement," Richard said quietly, the realization dawning. "A year after your death." Victoria's eyes flashed with old pain. "You married the woman who tried to kill me. How could I come back after that? How could I put our daughter at risk?" Richard sank into one of the student desks, looking suddenly older. "I had no idea all these years. Linda played the devoted wife while living with this secret." His voice hardened. "She watched me grieve for you, Victoria. Comforted me, all while knowing exactly what she'd done. And now she knows I'm alive," Victoria said, fear evident in her voice. "Doesn't she?" Richard nodded grimly. "My investigators' files were breached last night. The attack came from the Cole Foundation, Linda's domain." Victoria stood abruptly. "Then I need to disappear again, now before—" "No," Richard rose to meet her. "I won't lose you again, not now. You don't understand, she's dangerous, Richard. She tried to kill me once. What do you think she'll do now that everything she stole is threatened? We'll go to the police, with both our testimonies." "And what evidence?" Victoria challenged. "After 24 years, my car is at the bottom of the Pacific. The brake lines that were cut are long gone. It's my word against hers. The word of a woman who faked her own death against that of a respected philanthropist." Richard stepped closer, close enough now that she could smell his cologne. Different from what he'd worn before, but underneath it, the same essence she remembered. "Then we'll find evidence," he said with quiet determination. Together, the word hung between them, bridging 24 years of separation. Victoria looked up at him, seeing the man she'd loved, the father of her child, the life she'd lost. "Emily," she whispered. How much does she know? Everything your mother and your letters told her. She found the storage unit. She's the one who found your address in Portland. Richard's expression softened. She's angry, confused, hurt, but she wants to meet you, to know you. Victoria's hand went to her throat, to the space where her pendant used to rest. And now she wears the lotus. Richard nodded. It led me back to you both. The school bell rang, startling them. Voices filled the hallway outside. Students arriving for the day. I can't just leave, Victoria said, glancing at the door. These kids are counting on me. Call in sick, Richard urged. We need to get you somewhere safe. Linda knows you're here. Victoria hesitated, then nodded. Let me speak to the principal, as she gathered her things. A lifetime of caution made her glance out the classroom window. A dark sedan was parked across the street. A man sitting behind the wheel, watching the school entrance. Her blood turned to ice. Richard, she whispered, pointing. Richard followed her gaze, his expression hardening. Back door now. Are you certain it's safe? Victoria's question hung in the air of the private jet as it began its descent toward Santa Barbara after their narrow escape from the Portland school, slipping out through a service entrance while Ethan Ross created a diversion for the man watching from the sedan. Richard had insisted they return to California immediately. No, Richard answered honestly, his hand covering hers on the armrest. But we can't keep running. Emily needs us both now. And your mother? He didn't finish the sentence. They both knew Margaret Carter's time was limited. Victoria gazed out the window at the familiar coastline, the place she'd once called home, the place she'd fled in terror 24 years ago. I never thought I'd come back here, she whispered. We'll stay at the beach house, Richard continued. Linda doesn't know about it. I purchased it through a separate LC 3 years ago. She thinks it's just another investment property. The small jet touched down smoothly on the private airstrip. As they taxied toward the hangar, Victoria's grip on Richard's hand tightened. What if I've made a terrible mistake? What if Emily doesn't want to see me? Richard's eyes, warm with understanding, met hers. She's angry and hurt, yes, but she's been searching for you her entire life, Victoria, even when she didn't know it. Emily sat beside her grandmother's bed, the steady beep of monitors marking the passing hours. Margaret had been unconscious since early morning, her breathing shallow but stable according to the hospice doctors. I'm meeting her today, Emily said softly, stroking her grandmother's thin hand. My mother, after all these years. She blinked back tears. I wish you could be there. I don't know what to say to her. I've imagined this moment so many times. But now that it's here, her phone vibrated with a text message from Richard. Landed safely. Heading to the beach house now. We'll send a car for you when you're ready. Emily took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. Part of her wanted to race to the beach house immediately, to finally meet the woman who had given her life but remained a shadow. Another part wanted to flee, to protect herself from more hurt, more abandonment. Ms. Carter, a nurse appeared in the doorway. There's a woman here from the Cole Family Foundation. She says she has some paperwork regarding your scholarship. Emily frowned. I didn't accept any scholarship. She's quite insistent. Says it's time-sensitive due to your situation. The nurse glanced sympathetically at Margaret. A chill ran down Emily's spine, remembering her grandmother's warnings about the Foundation's interest in her over the years. Linda's people, watching, waiting. Tell her I'm not available, Emily said firmly. And please don't let anyone else in without checking with me first. As the nurse left, Emily quickly texted Richard. Someone from the Foundation is here asking for me. I think Linda knows I'm at the hospice. The response came immediately. Don't leave. Security team en route. 10 minutes. Emily slipped her phone back into her pocket, her hand brushing against the lotus pendant. For the first time, she truly understood why her mother had stayed away all these years. The fear was real, palpable. Linda paced the floor of her home office, phone pressed to her ear. What do you mean you lost them? How difficult is it to follow two middle-aged people out of a school building? Gary's voice crackled through the speaker. They had help. Someone created a distraction, got them out through a service entrance. By the time I realized, they were gone. And the investigator, Ross, disappeared too. I checked his hotel. He'd already checked out. Linda fought to control her rising panic. 24 years of careful planning, of building her perfect life, all threatening to collapse around her. Get back here now, they're coming to Santa Barbara, I'm sure of it. She ended the call and pulled up the security camera feeds on her computer, a system she'd had installed throughout the Cole estate without Richard's knowledge. One of many precautions she'd taken over the years. The gardens were empty, the house quiet. Except for the usual staff, Richard's study remained locked, as it had been since he'd left that morning without explanation. A notification pinged on her screen, the tracking app she'd installed on Richard's private jet showing its landing at Santa Barbara Airport. So she had been right. Her attention turned to another screen, this one showing a live feed from an iPad carried by her assistant, currently at Pacific Memorial Hospice. Through the camera, Linda could see the nurse returning to the young woman sitting vigil at Margaret Carter's bedside. Emily, her husband's daughter, the living proof of Victoria's survival and Linda's crimes. Linda zoomed in on Emily's neck, where the emerald lotus pendant gleamed under the harsh hospital lights. That damn necklace that had started this whole unraveling. "Ms. Carter says she's not available," the nurse was saying to Linda's assistant, "and she's requested no more visitors without her approval." Linda switched off the feed, her mind racing. They were closing ranks, circling the wagons. Richard, Victoria, and their daughter, reuniting to destroy everything she'd built. She would not allow it. Her phone rang. Her private investigator. "Mrs. Cole, I've tracked the jet to Santa Barbara, but they didn't go to the main house. They're heading toward the coast, possibly to that beach property Mr. Cole purchased a few years ago. The beach house, of course." Richard thought he'd been so clever, keeping that investment separate from their shared finances. "Keep watching the hospice," Linda instructed. "The girl will lead us to them eventually." As she hung up, her eyes fell on the family portrait hanging on the wall. She and Richard at some charity gala. Perfect smiles, perfect clothes, perfect lies. She'd spent 23 years erasing Victoria from his life, becoming everything she thought he wanted. Sophisticated, socially connected, the perfect partner for a man of his status. But she'd seen his face when he looked at that pendant. 24 years hadn't dimmed his love for Victoria Monroe. Linda reached for her purse, checking that the small handgun she'd purchased years ago was still there. Some problems couldn't be solved with money or social connections. Some threats needed to be eliminated permanently. The beach house sat on a secluded stretch of coastline north of Santa Barbara, accessible only by a private road winding down from the coastal highway. Modern and minimalist, its glass walls offered panoramic views of the Pacific, the same waters that had nearly claimed Victoria's life decades earlier. "It's beautiful," she said softly as Richard led her inside. "I bought it as a retreat, somewhere to think, to be alone." He didn't add what they both knew, that he'd been trying to escape Linda, even if just for brief periods. Ethan Ross was already there, having arrived ahead of them to secure the property. "Perimeter is clear," he reported. "I've got 2 men watching the access road. No one approaches without us knowing." Richard nodded. "Any word from Emily?" "Security team arrived at the hospice 15 minutes ago. They'll bring her here when she's ready to leave her grandmother." Victoria moved to the windows, looking out at the endless blue horizon. "I should have come back sooner," she said, almost to herself. "I should have found a way to protect her without leaving her." Richard joined her at the window. "You did what you thought was right. What matters is that we're all here now." A notification sounded on Ethan's phone. "That's the security team. They're on their way with Emily." Victoria turned from the window, her face pale. "I don't know if I'm ready." "Neither is she," Richard said gently. "But you've both waited long enough." As the sound of an approaching car reached them, Victoria's hand instinctively went to her throat, to the place where her pendant had once rested. Richard noticed the gesture. "It led us back to each other," he said. "Maybe it can help heal what was broken." The car pulled up outside. A door opened and closed. Footsteps on the wooden deck. And then, Emily was standing in the doorway, the emerald lotus gleaming at her throat, her eyes, Victoria's eyes, taking in the mother she'd never truly known. 23 years of separation hung in the silence between them. For a long moment, no one moved. Emily stood frozen in the doorway, her eyes locked on the woman across the room, the woman whose face she'd only seen in photographs, whose handwriting she knew from letters. but whose voice she'd never heard until this moment. Emily. Victoria's voice broke on the word. Filled with 23 years of longing, Emily's hands clenched at her sides, her expression a storm of conflicting emotions. Anger, hope, grief, longing. "You left me," she finally said, the words barely above a whisper but carrying the weight of a lifetime's abandonment. "I thought I was protecting you." Victoria took a hesitant step forward. "If I had stayed, I needed a mother." Emily's voice rose, years of hurt breaking through her composure. Not protection, not letters, not someone watching from a distance. "I needed you." Richard moved to intervene, but Ethan placed a hand on his arm, shaking his head slightly. This confrontation was long overdue. Victoria's eyes filled with tears. "You're right. I made the wrong choice. I thought Linda would come after you if she knew you existed. If she knew I was alive. I was terrified, injured, pregnant." She took a shaky breath. "But I should have found another way. I should have fought harder to be with you." Emily's jaw tightened. "Grandma told me you were at my graduation, my birthday parties. You were there, but you never showed yourself. Why, I was 18 at graduation, old enough to understand, to make my own decisions. By then it had been so long," Victoria said, her voice hollow. "I was a stranger to you. I thought coming back would only disrupt the life you'd built." She gestured helplessly. "I made so many mistakes, Emily. I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm just asking for a chance to know you now." Emily's hand went to the pendant at her throat, fingers tracing the emerald lotus. "Grandma's dying," she said abruptly. "She might not make it through the night." Victoria closed her eyes briefly, pain crossing her features. "My mother? I haven't seen her in almost 5 years. She kept your secret all this time, raised me, loved me when you couldn't or wouldn't." Emily's voice was sharp with accusation. "She deserves to see you before she dies." "Emily," Richard interjected gently, "it's not safe for your mother to go to the hospice. Linda knows we're all back in Santa Barbara. She has people watching the hospital. So we just let Grandma die alone," Emily challenged. Ethan, who had been monitoring his phone, looked up. "Maybe there's a way. The hospice has a service entrance. Minimal security with the right distraction. We could get Victoria in for a short visit." Victoria nodded immediately. "I need to see my mother. To thank her. To say goodbye." Richard hesitated, then sighed. "We'll need to be extremely careful, Ethan. Can you arrange it?" "I'll make the calls," Ethan said, moving to a corner of the room for privacy. Alone again in their fragile triangle, Richard, Victoria, and Emily fell into an uncomfortable silence. 24 years of secrets and separation couldn't be bridged in a single conversation. "I should check on Grandma's condition," Emily said finally, pulling out her phone and stepping onto the deck. When she was gone, Richard turned to Victoria. "Give her time. This is overwhelming for all of us." Victoria nodded, wiping away tears. "She has every right to be angry. I abandoned her, Richard. No matter my reasons. That's what it felt like to her. You did what you thought was necessary to keep her safe." "Did I?" Victoria's voice was bitter. "Or was I just a coward, too afraid to face Linda, to fight for what was mine?" She shook her head. "I'll never know now if there could have been another way." Linda sat in her home office, a glass of bourbon untouched on the desk beside her as she reviewed the surveillance footage from the past week. Every encounter between Richard and Emily, every time her husband had locked himself in his study, every call he'd made that she'd been able to trace through the household system, the pieces were falling into place. Richard had discovered Emily was his daughter, found Victoria in Portland, and now they were all back in Santa Barbara, hidden, but not gone. Not yet. Her phone rang. "Gary, I'm at the hospice," he reported without preamble. "The Carter woman is still here, but she stepped outside to make some calls. The grandmother's condition is deteriorating, according to the nurse's station. She's not expected to last the night." Linda considered this information. "They'll want to say goodbye. Victoria will risk coming to see her mother. I've got eyes on all entrances." "Good. If you see Victoria, don't approach. Just follow. She'll lead us to Richard." Linda paused. "And Gary, no mistakes this time. When the moment comes, you need to be certain. Like I was 24 years ago." His tone was defensive. "The job was done. No one could have predicted she'd get out of that car before it went over. Well, she did, Linda snapped. And now everything I've built is at risk. As she ended the call, Linda turned to her computer, accessing the Cole Enterprises financial systems using Richard's credentials, passwords he'd unwittingly shared over the years. She began transferring funds to offshore accounts she'd established long ago for exactly this contingency. 23 years as Richard's wife had taught her to plan for every possibility. If she couldn't stop Victoria from reclaiming her place, Linda would ensure she didn't walk away empty-handed. But first, she'd try Plan A, elimination. Ethan Ross worked his phone like a maestro conducting an orchestra, coordinating security teams, accessing hospital blueprints, and monitoring local police frequencies all at once. In his 2 decades as an investigator, he'd never encountered a case as personally dangerous as this one. "I've arranged for a distraction at the main entrance in 30 minutes, he reported to Richard and Victoria. "We'll have a 3-minute window to get you in through the service doors and up to Margaret Carter's room." Emily, who had returned from her call, nodded. "The nurses know me. As long as we're quiet, they won't question another visitor. Your security detail will maintain positions outside," Ethan continued. "I'll accompany Victoria personally." He turned to Richard. "You should stay here, sir. Too risky for both of you to be exposed." Richard began to protest, but Victoria placed a hand on his arm. "He's right. If Linda has people watching, they'll be looking for both of us together." 10 minutes, Ethan emphasized. "That's all we can risk, in and out." As Ethan stepped away to make final arrangements, Emily found herself alone with her parents for the first time. The reality of it. These 2 strangers who had created her, whose choices had shaped her entire existence, hit her with unexpected force. "She always told me you were a good man," Emily said suddenly, looking at Richard. "Grandma, she said you never knew about me, that you would have been a good father if you'd had the chance." Richard's eyes softened. "I would have moved heaven and earth to be in your life. Emily, to know you, to watch you grow." Emily turned to Victoria, her expression more guarded. "And she always defended you too. Said you cried every time you had to leave after one of your secret visits. Said it broke your heart over and over." Victoria could only nod, tears streaming down her face. Emily took a deep breath, as if coming to a decision. "I don't know if I can forgive you yet, either of you, but Grandma would want us to try." Her hand went to the pendant. "She said this was meant to bring us back together someday." "It has," Richard said quietly. "Despite everything, it has," Ethan returned, his expression all business. "Cars ready? We need to move now if we're going to make our window." As Victoria prepared to leave, Richard pulled her into an embrace. "Be careful," he whispered. "We've lost too much time already." "I can't lose you again!" Victoria's eyes met his, decades of unspoken feelings passing between them. "You won't." Emily watched this exchange, her heart conflicted. All her life, she'd imagined her parents as characters in a story. Tragic, romantic, larger than life. The reality was more complicated, more human. These were just people who had loved, made mistakes, and suffered the consequences. As she followed Victoria and Ethan toward the door, Emily didn't notice the small red dot of light that briefly appeared on the glass wall behind them, the laser sight of a high-powered rifle. Trained from the hillside above the beach house, wavering between targets before disappearing into the gathering dusk. The hospice hallway was hushed, lit only by soft wall sconces that cast long shadows across the polished floors. Victoria followed Emily and Ethan, her heart pounding against her ribs. After 23 years of watching from a distance, of being a ghost in her daughter's life, the reality of walking beside her now felt dreamlike. "Room 214, Emily whispered, slowing as they approached a half-open door. "The night nurse just finished rounds. We have about 15 minutes before she comes back." Ethan positioned himself strategically near the nurse's station, pretending to be engrossed in his phone while maintaining a clear view of both ends of the corridor. He gave Victoria a short nod, taking a deep breath. Victoria followed Emily into the room. The steady beep of monitors and the soft whoosh of oxygen provided a rhythmic backdrop to the scene before her. Margaret Carter, once vibrant and strong, now frail and diminished beneath white hospital sheets. "Mom," Victoria whispered, the word catching in her throat as she approached the bed. Margaret's eyes fluttered open, confusion giving way to disbelief, then recognition. Victoria. Her voice was paper-thin, barely audible. "Is it really you?" Victoria took her mother's hand, shocked by how light and bird-like it felt in her own. "Yes, Mom, I'm here. You came back." Margaret's eyes filled with tears. "I knew you would." "I'm so sorry," Victoria said, her voice breaking, "for everything I put you through, for asking you to carry my secret all these years." Margaret's gaze drifted to Emily, who stood watching from the foot of the bed. "You've met my two girls, together at last." A smile trembled on her lips. "Tell me you'll stay this time." Victoria nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm not running anymore. We're going to be a family." Margaret seemed to gather her remaining strength, her eyes suddenly clear and focused. "Linda Cole," she said, the name like venom on her tongue. "She came to me once, years ago, pretended to be from social services, asking about Emily. I recognized her from the society pages she suspected, even then." Victoria exchanged a glance with Emily. "What did you tell her?" "Nothing," Margaret said, but she kept watching, sending people. Her grip on Victoria's hand tightened with surprising strength. "Be careful. That woman would rather see you dead than lose what she stole." Emily moved to the other side of the bed, taking her grandmother's free hand. "We know, Grandma. We're being careful." Margaret's eyes drifted closed for a moment, then reopened with effort. "In my house, the attic, behind the loose panel in the north corner." Her breathing became more labored. "Insurance in case she ever found you." "What insurance, Mom?" Victoria leaned closer. "What's in the attic?" But Margaret's eyes had closed again, her breathing evening out as she drifted back to sleep. The brief surge of energy depleted. Emily looked across at Victoria. "What do you think she meant?" "I don't know, but if it's something that could help us against Linda, we need to find it." Victoria reluctantly released her mother's hand. "We should go. It's not safe to stay too long." As they prepared to leave, Margaret's eyes opened once more. "Victoria," she murmured, "my brave girl, I forgive you for everything." Victoria bent to kiss her mother's forehead. "I love you, Mom." "I know." Margaret's gaze shifted to Emily. "Take care of each other now." "Promise me." Emily swallowed hard, nodding. "I promise, Grandma." As they slipped out of the room, neither noticed the orderly at the far end of the hall, his face half hidden by a surgical mask. Watching their every move, Richard paced the length of the beach house living room. Checking his watch every few minutes, they should have reached the hospice by now. The visit wouldn't take long, then the drive back. His mind calculated estimated times, adding margins for caution, for security measures. His phone rang. Not Ethan or Emily, but a number he recognized all too well. Linda. For a moment, he considered not answering, but ignoring her would only raise her suspicions further. "Hello, Linda," he said, keeping his voice neutral. "Richard?" Her tone was pleasant, controlled. "I've been trying to reach you all day. The Baxter Group needs an answer on that waterfront development by tomorrow." Business. As if nothing had changed. As if he hadn't discovered her terrible betrayal. "I'll review the proposal tonight." He lied smoothly. "Where are you now?" "At the foundation office. Quarterly reports due this week. You know how it is." The lie in her voice was just as smooth as his own. "Will you be home for dinner?" "Don't wait for me. This might run late." "Of course." A pause. "Richard, is everything all right? You've seemed distant these past few days." The concern in her voice almost made him laugh. The perfect performance from a woman who had tried to murder the mother of his child and had lied to him for 23 years. "Just busy," he replied. "Nothing to worry about." "If you say so." Another pause. "I love you, Richard." The words hung between them. A test, a trap. He forced himself to respond as he always had. "Love you too." As he ended the call, Richard felt a wave of revulsion wash over him. 23 years of marriage to a woman who had nearly destroyed everything he held dear. 23 years of sleeping beside a murderer. His phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Visit complete. Heading back now." All clear. Richard released a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. They were safe, at least for now. But Linda was suspicious. The careful tone, the probing questions. She knew something was wrong. The end game was approaching faster than they'd anticipated. He needed leverage, something concrete to use against her when the moment came, something that would ensure she faced justice for what she'd done. Richard went to his laptop and began accessing the Cole Enterprises financial systems. After decades at the helm, he knew every account, every transaction flow. If Linda had been skimming or hiding money, and he suspected she had, he would find it. What he discovered made his blood run cold. Massive transfers had been initiated within the last hour, millions moving from company accounts to offshore destinations. Linda wasn't just suspicious. She was preparing to run. Richard immediately began countermeasures, freezing accounts, canceling transfers. As he worked, another realization hit him. If Linda was ready to flee, she was also ready to eliminate the threats to her freedom. Victoria and Emily were in danger. Now Gary Nolan followed the nondescript sedan at a careful distance as it left the hospice, keeping his headlights off until necessary. Inside that car were Victoria Monroe and her daughter, the two loose ends that needed to be permanently tied off. His burner phone vibrated with a text from Linda. Richard knows. Accelerate the timeline. No witnesses. Gary felt a bead of sweat trickle down his spine, despite the car's air conditioning. 24 years ago, he'd made a mistake, not ensuring Victoria was in the car before it went over the cliff. He wouldn't make the same error again. But something had been bothering him lately. Linda's increasing desperation, the coldness in her voice when they spoke, the way she referred to him as a liability rather than a partner. 24 years of being her accomplice, her fixer, her shadow enforcer, and now he sensed she was preparing to cut him loose. Gary wasn't a fool. He'd prepared for this eventuality years ago, documenting everything. The original plot against Victoria, the subsequent cover-up, the numerous times Linda had used foundation funds for personal gain, or to finance their monitoring of Emily Carter. As he followed the car containing Victoria and Emily, Gary made a decision. If Linda Cole was planning to sacrifice him to save herself, he'd make sure he wasn't the only one going down. His insurance policy, a detailed confession and evidence cache, was already prepared, waiting in a safe deposit box with instructions for its release if anything happened to him. All it would take was one phone call to set things in motion. But first, he had a job to finish. One last loose end to tie off. Then maybe, just maybe, he could finally be free of the nightmare that had begun on a rain-slicked coastal highway 24 years ago. "We're being followed." Ethan's voice was calm but tense as he checked the rear-view mirror for the third time. Dark sedan, about 3 car lengths back, keeping pace but hanging back just enough to avoid suspicion. Victoria's hand instinctively reached for Emily's, gripping it tightly. "Are you sure?" "It's what I do," Ethan replied grimly. "Same car that was watching the school in Portland. It's Gary Nolan, Linda's accomplice." Emily's face paled. "What do we do?" "We don't lead him back to Richard." Ethan made a sudden turn off the main road. "I'm calling in backup and changing our destination. We're going to set a trap of our own." Victoria stared at the side mirror. Memories of another night, another car, another chase flooding back. Rain lashing against windshields, brakes failing as she approached the curve. The terrifying plunge toward the churning Pacific below. "Not again," she whispered. "I won't run again." Ethan's eyes met hers briefly in the rearview mirror. "This time we're not running, Miss Monroe. This time we're finishing it." He pressed a button on his phone, connecting to Richard at the beach house. "Sir, we've got company. Implementing Protocol Delta. Alert the team." Richard's voice came through the car speakers, tense but controlled. "Understood. Be careful. All of you." As Ethan ended the call, Emily turned to her mother. "Grandma said there was something in her attic. Insurance against Linda. We need to get it." Victoria nodded. "Tell Ethan." Emily leaned forward. "We need to stop at Grandma's house. There's evidence in the attic that might help us." Ethan's jaw tightened. "Not with Nolan on our tail, too dangerous." "Then lose him first," Emily insisted. "But we need whatever Grandma hid there." After a moment's consideration, Ethan nodded. "Hang on. This is going to get interesting." He accelerated suddenly, weaving through traffic with expert precision, making a series of rapid turns through residential streets. The dark sedan followed, keeping pace despite Ethan's evasive maneuvers. "He's good," Ethan muttered. "Former professional, probably law enforcement or military. He was Richard's driver, Victoria said quietly. Before the accident, I remember him now. Ethan's eyes narrowed. That explains how Linda orchestrated everything. She had inside help. As they approached an intersection, Ethan suddenly smiled. Perfect timing. A police cruiser sat at the light. About to turn, Ethan accelerated through the yellow light, just as it turned red. The dark sedan, caught between running the light and losing them, hesitated just long enough for the police car to notice and flip on its lights. That should buy us a few minutes, Ethan said, making another series of turns before heading toward Margaret Carter's modest house in a quiet Goleta neighborhood. Gary cursed as he pulled over, watching his targets disappear around a corner while the police officer approached his window. The ticket would be the least of his problems if he lost Victoria and her daughter now. License and registration, the officer said routinely, as Gary reached for his glove compartment. His phone rang. Linda again. He let it go to voicemail, focusing on getting through this stop as quickly as possible. 5 minutes and 1 traffic citation later, Gary was back on the road, but Victoria's car was long gone. He pulled over and checked the tracking app on his phone. The device he'd managed to plant on their car during the chaos at the hospice should still be active. The signal showed them heading toward a residential neighborhood in Goleta. Gary recognized the address immediately. Margaret Carter's house. They were making a stop before returning to Richard. Perfect. An isolated location, away from the beach house security team. A better opportunity than he could have hoped for. Gary placed his gun on the passenger seat and headed toward Goleta, already planning his approach. Richard worked quickly, gathering financial records that showed Linda's systematic embezzlement from the Cole family foundation over the past decade. Millions diverted to shell companies and offshore accounts, all hidden beneath layers of legitimate charitable giving. Got you, he murmured, downloading the evidence to a secure drive. His phone rang. Linda again. This time, he let it go to voicemail. The game was in its final stages now. No more pretending. A security alert popped up on his laptop screen. Someone had accessed the main gate of the Cole estate using Linda's code. She was going home, likely to gather whatever she needed before disappearing. Richard dialed his security chief. I need a team at the main house immediately, Mrs. Cole is not to leave under any circumstances. Detain her if necessary. Understood. Sir, we have units approaching Mrs. Carter's residence as requested. Ida 3 minutes. Richard checked his watch. If Ethan's plan worked, it would all be over soon. 24 years of lies and betrayal finally exposed. He just hoped they weren't too late. Victoria felt a strange sense of déjà vu as she entered her mother's house. Emily close behind her. How many times had she stood in this very foyer as a terrified young mother, leaving her infant daughter behind? How many times had she watched this house from a distance, aching to walk through the door but too afraid to risk it? The attic access is in the hall closet, Emily said, leading the way. I used to play up there as a kid. Ethan remained vigilant, checking windows and securing doors. Make it quick. Backup is on the way. But we're exposed here. Victoria followed Emily to the closet, where a pull-down ladder led to the attic space above. The small room was dusty and cramped, filled with decades of family memories. Old furniture, photo albums, holiday decorations. North corner, Victoria recalled her mother's words. Behind a loose panel, they moved carefully through the cluttered space, checking the walls of the sloped attic until Emily called out, "Here, this panel moves." Victoria joined her, helping to slide the wooden panel aside. Behind it was a small metal lockbox. "There's no key," Emily said, examining it. "We don't need one." Victoria turned the box over, running her fingers along the bottom until she found what she was looking for. A small indentation, she pressed firmly, and the false bottom of the box slid open, revealing a small compartment containing a USB drive and a sealed envelope. "Mom always was careful," Victoria said with a sad smile. Footsteps pounded up the stairs, and Ethan appeared at the attic entrance. "We need to go now." Security spotted Nolan approaching on foot through the neighbor's yard. Victoria clutched the USB drive and envelope. "We've got what we came for." As they descended from the attic, a crash echoed from the back of the house. Breaking glass, Ethan immediately pushed Victoria and Emily behind him, drawing his weapon. "Back door's compromised," he whispered. "Head for the front. Security team should be outside by now. They moved quietly toward the front of the house, but as they reached the living room, a figure stepped out from the kitchen doorway, gun raised. "Hello, Victoria," Gary Nolan said, his voice eerily calm. "It's been a long time." Linda paced the floor of her bedroom, phone pressed to her ear. "What do you mean? You can't find them?" "They were heading to the grandmother's house." "I've got the house surrounded," Gary replied, his voice strangely flat. "But there's a complication. Security team approaching. Federal agents." "Federal?" Linda felt her blood turn to ice. "How?" "Someone's been building a case." "Banking records, offshore accounts, your accounts, Linda." The accusation in his tone was unmistakable. "Our accounts," she corrected sharply. "You're in this as deep as I am, Gary." "Am I?" he asked. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you've been preparing to run without me, setting me up to take the fall." Before Linda could respond, she heard voices in the background. Then Gary's voice, distant as if he'd lowered the phone. "In here. They're all in here." "Gary!" Linda's voice rose. "Gary, what's happening?" The line went dead. Linda stood frozen, her half-packed suitcase open on the bed, the reality of her situation crashing down around her. Gary had turned on her. Richard had discovered her financial schemes. And Victoria had returned to reclaim everything Linda had stolen. The doorbell rang, followed by insistent knocking. Linda moved to the window, peering out to see Richard's security team surrounding the house. No escape. The perfect life she'd built was collapsing like a house of cards. 6 months later, the Santa Barbara County Courthouse was packed to capacity. Journalists lined the back wall, their pens poised to record every detail of what had become the most sensational trial in the city's recent history. At the defense table, Linda Cole sat rigid in an expensive navy suit, her once perfect blonde hair now showing dark roots, her face a mask of controlled desperation. Richard entered through a side door with Victoria beside him, their fingers intertwined. Behind them followed Emily, her expression solemn but composed. The three took seats in the front row of the gallery, directly in Gary Nolan's line of sight as he sat at the witness stand. "Mr. Nolan," the prosecutor continued, "please describe the events of October 17th, 2001 in your own words." Gary shifted uncomfortably, his eyes darting briefly to Linda before focusing on the middle distance. Linda Prescott, Mrs. Cole, had been Richard Cole's assistant for about 2 years at that point. She was obsessed with him. When Victoria Monroe announced her pregnancy, Linda became desperate. She approached me, offered me $50,000 to help remove the problem. A murmur ran through the courtroom. "And what did that entail?" the prosecutor asked. Linda knew Victoria's schedule, knew she'd be driving the coastal highway that night. "I was to tamper with her brakes, make it look like an accident." Gary's voice had gone flat, mechanical. "I cut the brake line partially, enough that it would fail when she hit the curves near Point Morrow." "And were you successful?" Gary shook his head. "The car went over, but Victoria wasn't in it. We didn't know that at the time. We thought she was dead. The baby too." "What happened next?" Linda moved in on Richard Cole while he was still grieving. They married the following year. Gary finally looked directly at Linda, whose face had gone white. "And she paid me to keep quiet for 24 years. The prosecutor approached the evidence table, lifting a plastic bag containing a USB drive. This drive, recovered from Margaret Carter's home, contains recordings of phone conversations between you and Mrs. Cole spanning over 2 decades. "Can you tell the court why these recordings exist?" Gary's mouth twisted bitterly. "Insurance." Linda threatened to pin everything on me if we were ever caught. I wasn't going down alone. As the questioning continued, Victoria leaned her head against Richard's shoulder. "I never thought I'd see this day," she whispered. Richard squeezed her hand. "Justice is long overdue." Emily, seated on Victoria's other side, remained silent, her eyes fixed on Linda Cole, the woman who had stolen her chance at a normal family, who had forced her mother into hiding, who had lied to her father for decades. When Gary's testimony concluded, the prosecutor called for a short recess. As the courtroom began to empty, Linda's gaze finally met Emily's across the room. For a brief moment, something like regret flickered across her face before she was led away by guards. "All rise. Court is now in session. The Honorable Judge Eleanor Simmons presiding." 3 weeks later, the same courtroom was hushed as Judge Simmons prepared to deliver the verdict. The trial had been relatively short, but devastating for the defense. Between Gary Nolan's testimony, the recorded conversations, the financial evidence of embezzlement, and Victoria's emotional account of the night she nearly died, Linda's fate had seemed sealed from the start. In the case of California versus Linda Prescott Cole, on the charge of attempted murder in the first degree, this court finds the defendant guilty. Victoria closed her eyes, 24 years of fear finally lifting from her shoulders. On the charge of conspiracy to commit murder, this court finds the defendant guilty. On the charge of embezzlement of charitable funds, this court finds the defendant guilty. Each pronouncement seemed to physically diminish Linda, who stood trembling beside her attorney after completing the list of charges. Judge Simmons fixed Linda with a stern gaze. "Mrs. Cole, your crimes represent a profound betrayal, not only of your husband and the charitable organizations that trusted you, but of basic human decency. You attempted to murder a pregnant woman out of jealousy and greed, then built a life on the foundation of that attempted crime." The judge paused, reviewing her notes. "Taking into account the premeditated nature of your crimes, their duration, and your lack of remorse, this court sentences you to 35 years in state prison." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Linda swayed slightly before being steadied by her attorney. Additionally, Gary Nolan, having pled guilty to lesser charges in exchange for his testimony, is sentenced to 20 years with possibility of parole after 15. As Linda was led away by court officers, her eyes sought Richard's one last time. "I loved you," she said, just loudly enough for him to hear. Richard met her gaze steadily. "No, Linda, you never knew what love was." 1 month after the sentencing, a small gathering assembled on the beach behind Richard's coastal property. White chairs faced the ocean, where the setting sun painted the water in shades of gold and crimson. A simple arch of white roses marked the spot where Richard waited, dressed in a light linen suit, his face more peaceful than it had been in decades. Soft music played as Victoria appeared at the beginning of the aisle, radiant in a simple cream dress, her hair loose around her shoulders. But what drew every eye was the figure beside her, Emily, in a flowing blue gown, escorting her mother toward the man they both loved. As they reached the arch, Emily placed Victoria's hand in Richard's before stepping aside. Around her neck gleamed the emerald lotus pendant, catching the last rays of sunlight. The ceremony was brief and deeply personal, the vows spoken with the weight of 24 years of separation behind them. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, the small crowd erupted in applause, none more enthusiastic than Emily. Later, as twilight descended and lanterns illuminated the beachside reception, Richard found a moment alone with his daughter. "How are you doing with all this?" he asked gently. "It's been a whirlwind few months." Emily considered the question, watching her mother laughing with friends across the patio. "I'm still processing, I guess. Sometimes it feels like a dream. Finding you, meeting Mom, the trial." She touched the pendant at her throat. Grandma would have loved this day. Margaret Carter had passed peacefully the night of their visit to the hospice, Victoria and Emily by her side. Her funeral had been small but filled with love, a celebration of the woman who had sacrificed so much to protect her family. "She's here with us," Richard said softly. "In you, in everything she did to keep you safe." Emily nodded. "I've been thinking about the foundation. The real one, I mean, not Linda's version." "Oh," Richard raised an eyebrow. "I'd like to redirect its mission. Focus on helping children separated from their parents through no fault of their own. Foster kids, refugees, families torn apart by violence or disaster." Emily's eyes were bright with purpose. "Use my landscape design background to create healing gardens where these families can reconnect." Richard smiled proudly. "The Cole Family Foundation would be honored to have your vision leading it forward." "Cole Monroe," Emily corrected gently. "I'd like to take both names, if that's okay, to honor all parts of who I am." Richard's eyes filled with tears. "Emily Cole Monroe." "It's perfect." Across the patio, Victoria approached, her face glowing with happiness. "What are you two conspiring about over here?" "The future," Emily replied, a genuine smile spreading across her face as she looked between her parents. "Our future." Richard extended his hand to Victoria, drawing her into their circle. For too long, We let the past dictate our lives. No more. As the three embraced, the emerald lotus pendant caught the light of the lanterns, no longer a symbol of loss and separation, but of a family finally made whole. 5 years later, Emily stood at the visitor's entrance of the California Women's Correctional Facility, her heart pounding despite her determined expression. The lotus pendant still hung around her neck, a constant reminder of her journey. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Victoria asked from beside her. "No one would blame you if you changed your mind." Emily shook her head. "I need to do this. For me, not for her." They were led through security and into a sparse visiting room where Linda Cole waited, the orange jumpsuit a stark contrast to the designer clothes she'd once worn. 5 years of incarceration had aged her considerably, the glamour replaced by a weary resignation. "Emily," Linda said, surprise evident in her voice. "I didn't expect. Thank you for coming." "I didn't come for forgiveness," Emily said clearly. "I came to show you that you failed. You tried to destroy my family, but instead we found each other. We're stronger than your hatred." Linda's eyes dropped to the pendant at Emily's throat, then back to her face. "I've had a lot of time to think in here, about what I did, about what I lost." "Not what you lost," Emily corrected. "What you threw away, the difference matters." As Emily stood to leave, Linda called after her, "Does he ever ask about me?" Emily paused, then answered honestly, "No, they're happy. We all are." Outside in the bright California sunshine, Victoria waited anxiously. "How was it?" Emily took a deep breath of free air, feeling a weight lift from her shoulders. "It's done. The last piece of the past, faced and finished." As they walked to the car where Richard waited, Emily glanced back once at the prison walls. Linda Cole would spend decades inside those walls, while Emily had the rest of her life ahead of her. A life with both parents beside her, a successful foundation under her leadership, and most importantly, the truth finally brought to light. The emerald lotus pendant caught the sunlight as she turned away, sparkling with the promise of all that was yet to come.